Penn State has issues with recruiting wide receiver. Now, those issues can be fixed, but it's not going to be able to happen until the season starts.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So Penn State lost 3 priority wide receiver recruitments in a row. Now that's concerning, but what's the reason behind it? This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Brian Smith is back, the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. And since we're talking about recruiting, let's talk about the leaders in job recruiting, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Brian, it was first Matthew Alton picks Virginia Tech. Then it was Lex Cyrus picks South Carolina, and that one hurts a little more because he was in the state of Pennsylvania. And then they just lost Taz Williams to Baylor over the weekend. We've discussed that NIL is not Penn State's strong suit, but at some point in time, Marcus Hagans, the wide receivers coach, has to bear some responsibility because, Brian, the point I want to make to open up the show, and we'll talk more about recruiting and also Penn State choosing its whiteout opponent in Washington, that Deion Barnes isn't having this problem. Terry Smith isn't having this problem. Anthony Poindexter, all the other coaches they're recruiting their position groups well. Marcus Hagans seems to be coming up short. Is there cause for concern here, or is there a bigger picture to all of this?
Well, I don't have all the information, but the history with receivers, especially recent history, is they want to see it first. In other words, they want to see you have success. So it's chicken and the egg. But at the same time, I know you and I have both mentioned multiple times, even recently, Penn State's current roster has some pretty good talent at receiver, but how good is it? Like in terms of production? It's not. Why? So like they have to find a way to start the season red hot throwing the football. And I know that's not their MO offensively. They may have to eat it a little bit if they want to get some of these kids. They're not coming until they see it. That's what I'm hearing from some few other schools that are kind of tradition rich and whatnot that are struggling with receiver recruiting. Kids want to see it. So I don't know what it is, but like you hear the phrase in some way, shape, or form, the prima madonnas of football are usually receivers. And to be honest, there's a lot of truth to that. They want to see the opportunity to go to the NFL. Penn State hasn't put a lot of guys in the league in the last 10, 15 years at receiver. They had a few exciting players, but it's not been exactly awesome. And last year and the year before, et cetera, the passing game just didn't do much. That's going to be hard. Now, the part about Hagans in particular, it's still always relationships. That doesn't change. But they were in it to the end for a bunch of kids. If they were struggling to even get to the final 2 or 3, I'd throw something out there about it. But if you're to that point consistently, then I don't think it's a relationship or Hagans thing. I honestly just think that it's about the games themselves. They don't have that now. NIL, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, is not helping. But again, if Penn State had thrown for 3,200 yards and 26 touchdowns last year, it'd be a different situation. They didn't. So they're kind of struggling based on what's happened on the field, in my opinion.
Well, Brian, let me throw this back to you. What has Virginia Tech shown? Yeah, sure, they're promising as a program, but
Correct.
What receivers have they exactly sent to the league? Same with Baylor. Baylor has really been on a downward trend. I think Dave Aranda's a really good coach, but they haven't shown it in terms of overall team play. And then South Carolina, I guess Alshon Jeffrey was referenced a lot in Lex Cyrus's recruitment because he played for the Philadelphia Eagles and he went to South Carolina. And I'm thinking that's the example you're using. You're not even using Deebo Samuel as your prime recruiting, wide receiver recruiting.
Yeah, Debo's a dude. Yeah, there's no doubt.
So why is Penn State having this problem here if what you just described also applies to, in my opinion, all of the three: Virginia Tech, Baylor, and South Carolina. I feel like they're all in the same boat of, okay, South Carolina has Deebo Samuel, but I can't think of anybody other than Josh Gordon, for crying out loud, from Baylor.
Well, with those schools at the end, my guess, and this is purely speculation, if it's 50-50, you take the school that gives the more NIL, and those schools will pay more. That's as simple as it gets. Again, would Penn State lose those recruitments if they'd had a really big year last year throwing the ball? I highly doubt it. But even Baylor has just decided to start ponying up cash.
Yeah.
So that changes the narrative. And again, I don't know how much, but I mean, look, money's money. Nobody's going to say, no, I don't want it. So if it's really close and you can't really decide which one's offering more NIL, in that case, Penn State's in trouble. And it goes back to the point again. If you're winning big, it's a slam dunk choice. Just go to Penn State. They've got good development, blah, blah, blah. They're not developing guys right now at receiver. It's just true. So at least not by NFL draft standards, the kinds of things that big time recruits want to see, like Cyrus, et cetera. They got to show it on the field. And I know that's frustrating for Penn State fans, and I would be in the same boat as a Penn State fan. But let's see them throw the ball around this year. Maybe one of these kids flips their commitment. It wouldn't shock me. Wouldn't be the first time. And there's also other players they could go and get. And then you start 26, 27, you would see a completely different trajectory. You got to show it, man.
But this is what, so I agree with you that Penn State, from the running back spot and overall defensively, that the class of 2025 current committed prospects are a reflection of what Penn State's done over the past 5 years, essentially. And even you can throw Saquon Barkley even in there, even though he's been gone a little further than that. But you have 3 running backs committed in this class of 2025. You filled out your secondary. The point that I've been starting to make a little more is that even if Terry Smith lost a respect, and Anthony Poindexter as well, because they're responsible for the corners and the safeties, the two of them rebounded immediately. Like, they did not hesitate to go get the next player that was on the big board, and then they landed a commitment. Because when you look at Adarius Dixon out of Mater Dei, and he arguably is Penn State's best prospect in this class of 2025, as we discuss right now. But you get Jameer Joseph, you get Braswell Thomas, just to name a few other guys where they didn't have any issues. You have because when we were conversating a lot of the time, and I said a quote, I said, I'm confident that Penn State gets 2 of the players that, we're talking about, we're discussing, the 2 wide receivers. I can guarantee you that they get 1. I mean, that guarantee might as well be put to rest, because that only other player now in the bunch is Kobe Howard, and he still remains uncommitted. We're going to talk more about that, in the second segment. But Brian, that's what I mean. Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter, Deion Barnes all got the prospects that they wanted to, and Marcus Higgins didn't. And they have the same NIL funds that they're working with. It's not like there's different funds for the linebackers or the defensive backs versus the wide receivers. That's not how that works.
Well said. They can choose how much they want for guys, but they need receivers. So your point is absolutely on the mark. I just think that they're going to have to win some games for it to matter. And they're going to have to do it via the pass against teams that might they need a big game moment where they threw the ball, like a comeback victory against Ohio State or UCLA, something where it's exciting. It was cool the way they did. I know fans don't always want to hear that. It's style points matter with receivers a lot. So they do that. I think this will turn around in a hurry. Until then, it's kind of moot.
I mean, it's cool to play running back at Penn State. Saquon Barkley, sure. Miles Sanders, Journey Brown before the unfortunate off-the-field health-related circumstances. And then you look at cornerback, defensive back, Joey Porter Jr., Jaquan Brisker, Jair Brown. All those guys are making strong, for the most part, strong NFL impacts, and then had phenomenal collegiate careers. What can you say about Penn State's wide receiver room that's been the case, other than Allen Robinson, or I guess in Chris Godwin? You're still waiting. Parker Washington is still going to have to work his way through. KJ Hamler, right? Justin Shorter was that last 5-star wide receiver that came to Penn State, and he transferred out. It didn't work at Penn State. Juwan Johnson, another big name, ended up going to Oregon. and then ultimately converts to tight end in his NFL career. So it is not fun to go play wide receiver at Penn State. The other positions that they're recruiting very well, which a class of 2025 is an indication of, that's why that's why they have an easy time. But Marcus Hagans, I hope that he can bridge the gap here, because he's really good as far as a developmental coach. But in one season, we saw the struggles there. You can't, even though Taylor Stubblefield had been fired, I think that Marcus Hagans came into a rough situation. But you can't keep saying, well, it's Stubblefield's fault, it's Stubblefield's fault, it's Stubblefield's fault. How? He's not the one coaching. He's not the one recruiting anymore.
Yeah, everybody likes to point. They want a pound of flesh, as the saying goes. I'm not as concerned about it. I mean, if you think about Penn State football, really the only thing left is fixing the passing game and making it at least above average. If they would have averaged just 35, 40 more yards a game passing last year, they'd have been a lot better team. Now, I don't know if they'd have beat Michigan or Penn State or Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Those two teams, they played so poorly in the passing game in those two games. It was just ridiculous. But they have to be able to throw the ball, especially down the field. It's not like Drew Aller struggles with arm strength by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. So that, again, it's just style points. I don't think with the new coordinator, that's going to be a problem. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I think Penn State's going to surprise some people with their passing attack. It'll be a lot more diverse, probably a few more shifts and motions to give some more leverage, a few more one-on-ones that are more advantageous for the Lions. It'll be pretty obvious. And I mean, let's be honest. And I'm not trying to pick on him, but Kansas is basketball school. He had the offense going pretty well in Lawrence. That's not easy. Yeah. So I like the chances for that to work with Penn State's talent. No offense to Kansas.
To sum it all up, Marcus Hagans is responsible. He's the wide receivers coach. But Penn State needs to figure out its NIL initiative. And Penn State needs to prove it with results. There's nothing wrong with having great running backs and a great defense. But wide receiver and even quarterback. If you want consistent recruiting at the cool football positions, then you need to be able to show it. And that's, I think, Brian's point above all else, and I couldn't agree more. But now, what is next for Penn State's 2025 class? Is that it? It might be. There's really not much left they can do before flip season. We'll discuss that more coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your number one ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to its peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car into that MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Brian, this is something that I've been saying now for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, that Penn State's class of 2025 was essentially finished after, hey, what's Randy Adarica going to do? Okay, now he's committed to Penn State. That's a win. And then Lex Cyrus and Matthew Alton, Taz Williams, all these other players. That Penn State's big board is essentially complete. I know they lost out on a dozen. I've almost lost count. At least a dozen of the priority recruits that it felt like really would have made this class whole. You can try to flip Zahir Mathis. He's in that category, but Michael Carroll, Andrew Olish, Matt Zollers, and of course, what do all these players have in common? They're in Pennsylvania. Quincy Porter, with the Penn State's top prospects that are off the board that they didn't get, that I feel like those recruitments are other than to be determined with Zahir Mathis, because we're hearing good intel that him and Deion Barnes have a really good relationship, so something could happen there. But there's not a lot of other uncommitted prospects that are strongly interested in Penn State, whereas vice versa, the interest is reciprocated. Kobe Howard is really the only one that falls under that category. Zamir Smith is another player that he decommitted from Alabama, was committed. He's an athlete. He could play wide receiver. Okay, Penn State needs that. But I think he's being recruited as a safety. Maryland, since he is from that state, is leading his recruitment from what I gathered. There's just some fringe names here and there that we can mention, but the only one that I feel confident in, are the two to focus on the most, are Kobe Howard, who remains uncommitted, but Ole Miss and Florida are still targeting him. I guess there's Nashawn Montgomery as well, but I feel like he's all but projected to the Florida Gators. And then Zahir Mathis, if Penn State continues to chip away at that recruitment, could maybe ultimately flip him back to stay home in Pennsylvania. But that's about it. That's really all I have.
Well, this is the new norm, though. There will be 2 or 3 kids, whether it hits the airwaves or not, the Penn State at least has a dialogue with now and or will that end up visiting Happy Valley, committed elsewhere, or at least right now leaning heavily elsewhere. That's the nature of recruiting. Coaches change. They fill up at spots. Something happens. A player falls out of favor with the coaching staff.
Sure.
Every year there'll be 2 or 3 more guys. And to be honest, they got over 20 commitments. They don't need a lot of quantity. They need just a couple of guys that are really good and they're done. If you added one really good receiver and you flipped a kid from Ohio State, I mean, would you really be disappointed with this class? I wouldn't if I was Penn State fan. Yeah, I mean, you'd be in a pretty good spot. So I think they're close. It's just frustrating that it's going to be a while, and I get that. But I'm surprised more schools don't do this. Like sometimes you just got to play the long game with the elite kid. You're not going to beat Ohio State and Michigan on a consistent basis without a few guys that my dude is better than your dude, especially when you take one away from Ohio State. That's really important.
Yeah.
You can't lose the Philadelphia kids to the Bucks. That's a personal thing. That's a state thing. That's a setting an example deal. All
they can just walk in and recruit the talent that's in your state. Yeah.
Yeah, not just anybody either. He might be the best player in the state. You could make that argument. So at least upside wise, I don't know if he's the best player. That's debatable. But 6'4", 6'5" pass rushers, always in demand, Zach. That's not going to change. So that's how I would look at it. If they play the long game, they've got a chance. Again, they should have a pretty good season. They've got a chance to be right where they need to be at the end of the year and maybe flips one of these guys. The other advantage, just in general, to my knowledge, your defense coordinator, I know it just changed, but I think they're in a pretty good spot. Obviously, the defensive roster's there. To try to flip somebody like him, that's a kid or any defensive player they would go after. It's not going to be hard to sell the defense. Conservatively, it should be top 10 in the nation, I would think, this year. Like it may be top 5. It's in that range anyway. However you want to word it. So again, that shouldn't be hard. Finding the one receiver is the enigma until otherwise proven.
I mean, Penn State wanted 4 wide receivers, and it's just the way that it all stacked up on top of each other, back to back to back. At least maybe try to wedge a win in there. And again, it's not like Penn State was okay. Oh, they lost to Texas. Oh, they lost to LSU. They lost out to Ohio State, Oregon. No. Baylor, South Carolina, all these schools that just don't have recent proven results to say like, well, Penn State struggles to showcase wide receiver talent. Okay, that's fair. But that same standard that we mentioned in the first segment absolutely applies to any of those 3 other schools. So it's a combination of everything. Brian, the class of 2025 is good. It's solid. According to Rivals, 24/7 Sports, this is a top 10 class. I don't think it will stay there because other schools that are behind Penn State are still continuing to chip away at the higher end 4 stars, 5 stars, where those recruitments are drawn out. But Penn State has 22 commitments. I think this is going to finish as a top 15 class as we sit here. Maybe, again, depending on where you look, it could be 16th or 17th. It will be solidly inside the top 20 with the hope that it finishes around 12th, 13th, or 14th. That's kind of the best case scenario at this point, unless there's a late riser in among the prospects that Penn State happened to be recruiting for the longest time, but it wasn't, this prospect isn't exactly a take. Then they blow up their senior season. and then they add into the class of 2025. But this is kind of it. To say that, oh, Penn State, just with a few other players, they could boost themselves and be cemented in the top 10. This, unfortunately, is not a top 10 class. Penn State would need to have everything go right in its way for that to happen. And they could have had that, but then they just continued to stack recruiting loss on top of each other to finish up June and then going into the middle part of July here.
Yeah, I mean, they did everything they needed to without finalizing. Losing the kids to Texas, like you said, is one thing. Baylor is another. Fair or not, perception matters. Losing a kid to South Carolina is not the same as losing it to Georgia. Those kind of, I totally get it. But I just don't think that any of the receivers we're talking about, because they went after pretty darn good players, are automatically just going to say Penn State. A lot of the fans that I know complain on message boards, they look at things through a very limited view, and the recruits look at it like, where am I going to get development to get the NFL? They don't care about the school as much. That's how this works in today's college football. So I'm not that surprised. Several other programs that struggle, like Iowa, couldn't sign a receiver to save their life. Even with Notre Dame's brand, they're going to lose a few kids at receiver they've recruited all year and done a good job. They didn't produce anything last year. Why would kids come? It's the same thing. Until you produce, it's hard. Now they got to turn it around this season. But they've done the due diligence. Like, their staff does a really good job of getting out ahead of stuff. I've said it before. I think Penn State's conservatively a top 5 program in like their recruiting infrastructure. And that's why they were even in the race for like Cyrus and some of these guys. So I don't think they're necessarily out. And again, there could be 1 or 2 kids out there that end up being in on that aren't necessarily on the public radar now that end up helping this class as well.
This is just kind of it, is the point I'm trying to make here, as far as fireworks or any exciting developments, breaking news. Kobe Howard's the one that everyone's going to look towards the most. And again, as I sit here, you and I sit here, that Penn State and Kobe Howard seem like the right match. But again, Ole Miss, Florida still continuing to recruit him. So that one's probably going to take some time. And I also want to mention the Lash Bash is coming up. For anybody that doesn't know or is listening to this podcast for the first time, that's another big recruiting event for Penn State. But that's all encompassing. That's not only for 2025, the current recruiting cycle that they're in, but 26, 27, right? That's kind of a bigger showcase for them. Kobe Howard is, from what I've gathered, is supposed to be visiting at the end of July for the Last Bash, so maybe you could expect a commitment around there. But unless Zahir Mathis decides to change his mind anytime soon, or you really turn things around with a prospect like Zamir Smith, I also should mention Malachi Goodman maybe. That's someone that kind of has been forgotten on Penn State's recruiting radar, but it's just because they're going up against Alabama, Auburn, and Georgia, and I don't feel good about that one just because of who you're going up against. So now you not only have strong NIL, but strong program results. So that's what I mean. Penn State, other than maybe a select 2 or 3 prospects, this is the class of 2025, and it's good, but you wish it could be better.
I've heard some mixed results on Malachi. Like, I know one of the people down here in the South thinks Penn State's right there for him. And this is somebody that's not a Penn State guy. I can assure you that. So it just shows you proximity still holds water. It's just ironic that this year New Jersey kids are doing better with Penn State than maybe some of the PA kids. But recruiting is weird. So location doesn't matter anywhere near as much as it used to. But I would be surprised if they don't get a few of the elite kids if they have a great year. If they go 10-2 or better this coming season, like against their schedule, which we'll talk about in a second, I think they'll turn around a few recruitments and win more than people think.
Yeah, the recruitment flip season might heat up a little bit for Penn State, but that's not going to happen in August or September. That change could come late October, early November, especially in the heart of the schedule when it's USC, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington, all back-to-back. So speaking of Washington, Penn State has chosen the Huskies as its annual whiteout. Good or bad choice, it's the right one. We'll tell you why on the other side of this break. Who would have thought this would have been a whiteout game 5, 10, many years ago? Penn State versus Washington. That's where we are with college football. And Penn State gets it right under the circumstances. November 9th, CBS. We don't know if it's going to be a 3:30 or a 7 o'clock kickoff, but Penn State elects to choose Washington as the whiteout game. They announced the other themes for all 7 home games. Ohio State is going to be the helmet stripe game, which is essentially a pseudo whiteout because only the 50-yard line is in blue. The rest of the stadium is in white. Penn State gets it right because the networks just can't be straightforward with Penn State, Brian. That's the problem here. Penn State can't get on the same page with Fox, or I should say Fox can't get on the same page with Penn State. Fox, CBS, NBC, there's just not a good dialogue. Fox doesn't, it's really particularly Fox. They do not value the idea of the whiteout and what it stands for and why this game should be in prime time. And since we don't know what the Ohio State game is going to be, what time it's going to be played at. Fox could take it, and if they take it, that would be at noon. If they say, no, we're going to take an example, Oregon and Michigan, that's available for that weekend as well. If they decide to take that one, then NBC would pick up Penn State versus Ohio State. And then that would probably be a 7:30 kickoff because that's big Saturday night, right, for NBC. So Penn State does the right thing by saying, okay, we're not giving you the whiteout, but we'll give you something close to it since we don't know what the networks are going to give us. We don't know if it's going to, because we do not want the whiteout at 12 o'clock. So kudos to Penn State, Pat Kraft for standing their ground respectively and just not giving into the TV networks. And I think they didn't choose Illinois. It's September 28th. I think you get it under the circumstances for the 2024 season. This was the right choice to make Washington the whiteout.
I know that the way it works now is the way that fans hate, and I'm not a big fan either, but I understand it. They want to be as close to the game as possible for the announced times because advertisers will pay them more. That's beginning and end of conversation. They want to make sure that it's the highest ranked teams possible, and it's negotiated into the contract. That's here to stay. So teams that do these kinds of things, there's no fixing it. But if Penn State holds its ground and, they come in with 1 loss or no losses, that'll be a night game. So that's the era we're in, though, setting up everything and knowing when the game times are, unless it's, an out-of-conference game early in the year, those days are over. So I hate that because you used to be able to say, well, look at the schedule. You can tell which games are going to be night games. Can't do it anymore. It's really goofy, but that's the money in those TV contracts, the Big Ten, SEC, et cetera, have signed. So they control everything with the times. I think it is interesting that it's Washington, though. It's the team that's coming off a runner-up. Mm-hmm. It's a unique opponent. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, it should be kind of cool. The fans will enjoy that. So that's a great way to do it.
The only drawback is that it is pushing towards the middle of November. Penn State did a fan poll. I can't remember if this was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but it's been recent. It's been within 5 years where they polled the fans and they said, hey, do you prefer caliber of opponent or timing within the season? And it was a very close margin. I think it might have been something like 55% to 45%, where people said, hey, we would actually prefer, democracy said, the total overall vote said that Penn State should have its whiteout games convenient for the weather. So that's why Illinois kind of came into the conversation. When you're talking about caliber of opponent, Washington isn't perfect because they lost the head coach. Jed Fish comes in. Michael Penix is off to the NFL. They lost their 3 leading wide receivers, right? Washington is not going to look the same as they did from the 2023 season. But in terms of home opponents, that's Penn State's second most exciting game. Ohio State's number 1. That's obvious. You don't know what's going on with that kickoff time. The next one on the list is Washington. That's why Penn State got it right. Illinois doesn't hold that same kind of brand power. A 9 overtime game. It's not about the wins and losses here. We're talking about brand power, what's going to eyeballs on the TV, and butts and seats. You can't do Maryland because we're really talking. That's way too late in the season. That's the final game. That's the final home game of the regular season. You can't do that. If we're talking about, people are concerned about weather. So Washington and Ohio State are already kind of teetering on, this is in November. Penn State didn't want to do that because they would prefer that this game, the whiteout, is scheduled for night against an Ohio State or a Michigan for the future, Oregon, USC, in the middle of October when the weather is fair. You might get some rain, but you certainly won't get any snow, and the temperatures won't be too warm. They'll be nice, cool, crisp fall weather where it's about mid-50s and the night sky is perfect. That's Penn State's dream world, but you're not going to get that there's too many factors in there to get that perfect setup each and every time. But you saw that the past 2 years, they compromised on caliber of opponent to have better weather and to have the game at night.
I think that's going to be the way it works from now on, especially fans that are trying to travel for the whiteout game. Weather matters. If I'm going to go through a lot, I get it. Like the guy tells his wife that she's got to go with him, like she's not going to want to go in the snow. Like let's just cut to the chase here. That's the problem. If you do the men and women on the weather thing, I know who's voting which way. That's how that goes. I've been in that conversation many times with some of my friends and family. So it matters. Iowa, a school like that can be that school anytime if it's not a perfect situation with Ohio State or Michigan. It is what it is, but I think that event is awesome. It'll still go off really well.
He is Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting expert. All of his platforms and socials will be linked down in the description. Brian, thanks so much for the time to talk some more recruiting as well as Penn State's upcoming schedule for the 2024 season as they pick Washington as the whiteout game. And I'm sure, there won't be some groundbreaking developments in Penn State's recruiting, but we'll keep on what Penn State does for the class of 2025 moving forward and check in with you on a weekly basis still. So thank you so much for the time as always.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And as always, thanks so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, your thoughts on Penn State's recent recruiting of wide receivers, what the class of 2025 will look like when it is all finished, and Penn State's schedule with the announced game themes. If you like this episode, please leave a like on it, share with friends and family, and if you're not already, become an everydayer, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And of course, don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.